Chapter 261, Luo Hui's Rage. Translator, Citalan. Editor, Citalan.
The training ground was just next door to where Luo Hui was staying. Dahmer immediately began to set up the isolation array in a skillful manner. Following that, the young lady touched her interspatial ring, making a huge cauldron fly out of the ring.
Dang! With a loud thud, the huge cauldron landed on the floor. With a few of Luo Hui's hand seals, a rainbow-colored flame began to emerge from the cauldron as it started burning.
The training ground's temperature began to increase rapidly. Dahmer backed out and left Luo Hui alone in the training ground to cultivate. Luo Hui began to expirate as she started cultivating her cultivation technique, absorbing the fire essence as she tried to gain understanding in the fire laws.
The flames burning in the huge cauldron were collected from a mysterious land within the remote wilderness.
The fire essences were being absorbed and released by Luo Hui. Due to the high temperature, even the purple tungsten metal that tiled the floor nearly melted.
At this point, a footprint could be left on what was usually an extremely hard purple tungsten metal.
Luo Hui's body started to turn red as her body heated up while she was in this extreme environment. She continued this cultivation for 4 hours. The changing flames in the huge cauldron were now slowly subsiding, and the heat waves that flooded the training ground also slowly started to dissipate.
Luo Hui's entire body was now drenched in sweat, but her flushed face was one of excitement.
She had gained another understanding in the laws of fire. If this went on, she would soon enter the third realm of her Sacred Fire Infinite book. My Sacred Fire Infinite book is still only at the peak of the second stage. Although I cannot find an opponent amongst my peers, this is still far from the realm I want. Father told me that when my Sacred Fire Infinite book reaches the 7th stage, I would be able to barely help share in his burdens.
But the 7th stage is so far away. Thinking about what her father wanted to do, Luo Hui was a bit anxious. It was something troublesome, not having enough power. With this thought in mind, Luo Hui walked past a large mirror and took a casual glance at it. She noticed her pretty face in the mirror. Originally, this training ground did not have a mirror, but as this training ground was only used by her, she decided to take the liberty of placing more than 10 Divine Mercury mirrors in it. These Divine Mercury mirrors were made by smiths. The metal used was extremely expensive, and the mirror created by it could reflect a person's looks perfectly. It was on a completely different level compared to the bronze mirrors used by mortals. There were more than 10 mirrors placed in a specific manner, so that one could stand at a certain spot in the training ground and see one's reflection from all angles. At that moment, Luo Hui was standing at that spot, admiring her reflections. Luo Hui was at the age where she was as pretty as a flower. Due to her body being drenched in sweat, her clothes were now sticking to her body, outlining her body's perfect lines. Her slim and slender body was supported by 2 legs that were sticking close together. As her clothes were wet, one could vaguely see her delicate skin. Those perfect legs were soft and her flesh was springy to the touch. Her full and firm female twin peaks could be easily seen due to her wet clothes. One could even vaguely see 2 tiny protruding dots. Luo Hui was like a delicate flower bud that could make one be lost in wild and fanciful thoughts. As Luo Hui looked at her own reflection, all her worries quickly receded from her mind. She said to herself, "So perfect. Excellent martial arts talent, desolate heaven technique and alchemy talent. Perfect looks and a perfect body line. Do I have any weaknesses? If I were a guy, I would also fall in love with myself. Speaking of this, it sure is a headache. What would happen if no one is worthy for me? This Tai Divine City gathers all of the elites, yet from the guys here, none of them are any good. Yes. I would rather stay unmarried for life than let these toads luck out." As Luo Hui spoke to herself, due to her body's heat and excitement, her skin was very red. She turned her body a few times and admired her perfect body line with a 360 degrees view. At the same moment, the isolation array Donger had previously set up for Luo Hor to allow her to cultivate in the Sacred Fire Infinite book had dissipated with time. Just as the isolation array dissipated in Luo Hoyer's face was still one of narcissism, she suddenly felt that something was amiss. As she slowly turned her body and noticed that not far from her, there was a youth in linen clothes with a saber on his back. He was standing there stunned, with a surprised and baffled expression on his face. He was looking at her with one eye raised higher than the other. Luo Hor was extremely shocked. It took her a few seconds before she suddenly covered her chest and screamed, You? How did you come in here?" Luo Hor was embarrassed and angry. She had already lived in the 69th floor of the Central Divine Tower for 2 years. This training ground was to be shared amongst the 69th floor residents, but in these 2 years, it had pretty much been her exclusive training ground. How did a man enter here? Yun looked at the pyramid-shaped key in his hand and raised his hand slightly. He meant, I entered using the key to open the door. You. Luo Huayer's eyes burned with anger. When she recalled the words she said to herself, she felt so embarrassed that she could die. The isolation array was already greatly weakened before she began speaking. With an expert's listening power, it would be very easy to hear everything at such a close distance. Besides, one could also read from one's lips. How long have you been here? Luo Huaer asked while clenching her teeth. I just came. Yun explained hurriedly. Luo Huaer looked at the training ground door which Yun had closed, and from his position from the door, Luo Huaer could estimate that this kid had been here for quite a while. I'll kill you. Luo Huaer was fuming and immediately unsheathed a sword. Don't be rash. Yun could feel Luo Huaer's murderous intent as he retreated. He sure was King unlucky. He had just moved into the Central Divine Tower today and already he encountered this type of situation by opening the training grounds door with the key. I didn't know that you were training in here. I didn't mean to. You. Luo Huaer's face was red with embarrassment. She leaped forward and slashed at Yun with her sword. This slash was accompanied with wanton blade beams and an overpowering aura. Before the sword could reach him, Yun felt his body's pores contract. It was as if 10,000 swords had already reached his body. What the heck? Yun was dumbfounded. This girl's sword attack was too fierce. Even without using the purple crystal's vision, he could feel the surging energy coming from the girl's sword. In comparison, Li Hong was nothing. He definitely was not able to withstand that attack. The girl probably did not measure her strength due to her embarrassment that turned into anger. If he were to be killed or seriously injured by her, causing him to become bedridden for half a month, it would be a grave injustice. If he could not take on this attack, it would be no different from suicide. He could not avoid it even if he wanted to. Yun's mind was filled with scrolling words of K your mother. How could he be so unlucky? In his panic, Yun saw the blade beams engulfing him. The red-clad girl's pair of little bunnies were bouncing naughtily around as she wielded her sword. As the girl's clothes were clinging tightly to her body, and because both of her hands were wielding the sword, she was not able to cover her chest. The picture in front of Yun was clearly seen by him. He could even see through the clothes, seeing the red amongst the white soft skin. Immediately, Yun thought of something and a spell of wrath rose from his heart. Since he could not take the attack head-on, he had to outsmart her. He looked at the girl's bosom, pointed with a finger and shouted, "Beauty, I can see your breasts." Ah! Luo Hor cried in fright and the sword chi greatly dissipated. With the sword chi blockage released, Yun quickly pulled out his 1,000 army saber and slashed outwards. Cha! Luo Huaer's remaining sword chi was broken apart by Yun. Yun then quickly used his minute subtlety movement technique and rushed out. He appeared in a blink of an eye in front of the training grounds door and kicked open the door. Thankfully, when Yi-Yun entered he had only closed it instead of locking it. If he had done so, the purple tungsten door would definitely give Yi-Yun trouble. The decision to escape was the wisest now. To stay behind while the girl was fuming with rage would be to court death. Girls were not reasonable creatures, even more so for girls burning with rage. Pang! With the door closed, Yi-Yun immediately disappeared. Luo Hor was holding her sword in one hand while her other hand was covering her chest. She stood in the training ground in a daze. She was furious and embarrassed. She was like a cat whose fur was standing on end after its tail was stepped on. Damn that lecherous kid. If I catch you, I'll definitely kill you. Luo Hor was already extremely angry, but when Yi-Yun said his last words, "Beauty, I can see your breasts," it made her so enraged that she gnashed her teeth. She lowered her head and looked at her chest. The outline of her full breasts was completely brought out due to her wet clothes. There were even parts in the fabric that were vaguely translucent. This made Luo Hor feel like she could die. First the rascal heard her narcissistic words, then he saw her breasts. She had even previously said that she would rather stay single all her life than let those toads luck out. But at the next moment, she had been completely seen through by a toad. That damn toad! Luo Huier's chest heaved up and down. I'm also dumb. I forgot I can use the fire laws to dry my clothes. As everything had happened too quickly, Luo Hor did not have the opportunity to think it through. She had forgotten about the fact that she had a wardrobe malfunction because her clothes were now drenched with sweat. But even if Luo Huier's grasp of the fire laws were exquisite, it would still take a few seconds to dry her clothes with a flame. Any faster and her clothes would end up burning instead. Those few seconds were enough to let that rascal see through everything. With these angry thoughts in her mind, Luo Hor angrily rushed out of the training ground. Pang! Luo Hor kicked open the door to her own residence. Damn you, Donger, come out now. Luo Hor had a sword in hand and had a threatening stance. During her usual cultivation, as she did not want others to see her Sacred Fire Infinite book, Luo Hor would always set up an isolation array and let Donger guard the door. But today, Donger had disappeared. What? What's wrong, miss? Donger lifted her head and looked at Luo Hor in a daze. Her two hands were still holding up a round bun with it nearly stuffed into her mouth. So her words were muffled. Seeing Luo Huier's angry expression, Donger tried her best to swallow the mouthful she already had in her mouth. She then placed the bun into a bowl and hid the bowl behind her back. It was as if this ostrich act would give her better peace of mind. I made you guard the door and here you are, eating. Luo Hor asked furiously. In her anger, she grabbed the bowl and smashed it to the ground. Pa! With a clear snap, the bowl broke from the smash. Seeing the broken bowl and the dirty bun, Donger was dumbfounded. Tears streamed down her face as she felt wronged. Donger did not know why Luo Hor was in such a bad mood. Luo Hor had been cultivating in the training ground for 2 years. In those 2 years, Donger seriously guarded the door in the beginning. But later on, as no one ever came, she naturally relaxed. Donger was still young at heart and Luo Hor would sometimes cultivate for more than 20 hours at a go. For a child to guard the door daily, she would be bored to death. Hence, she would occasionally go run some errands and the missus never blamed her for that in the past. Chapter 262, I am neighbors with him? Damn Donger, darn Donger. You only know how to eat. Then, I'll let you eat. Luo Hor was pinching Donger's ears. At this moment, her heart was filled with anger, with no place to vent her frustration. Just recalling the last words Yi-Yun said about seeing her breasts made Luo Hor feel like exploding. Painful, painful, ouch. Miss, you are going to pull off Donger's ears. Donger said in an aggrieved manner. Poor Donger still did not know what had happened. She was happily eating a bun, when suddenly a calamity from the heavens fell upon her. That is why she was in such a state now. Only then did Luo Hua release her. Donger's tiny ears were red and her large eyes were filled with tears. Seeing Donger's pitiful look, Luo Hua's heart started to soften. But she was still fuming inside. She grunted, "I told you to guard the door. Why were you here eating and not guarding the door?" Donger touched her tiny red ears and said wrongfully, "I was hungry." It was common for Donger to feel hungry guarding the door without a replacement. Of course, even if Donger was not hungry, she would not just focus on guarding the door. She had plenty of other things to do, such as staring blankly, sleeping, and fiddling with flowers. She could even spend most of the day watching a small bug walking on a blade of grass. In the central divine tower, Luo Hua would spend most of her time cultivating or practicing her desolate heaven technique. Although Luo Hua seemed like a capricious person, she was always working hard on her cultivation. Hence, Donger would be left alone and bored out of her mind most of the time. Mississippi was the Sacred Fire Infinite book seen by someone else. Donger pursed her lips as she asked fearfully. The reason why Luo Hua instructed Donger to guard the door was to prevent her from being disturbed, and even more importantly, prevent others from discovering her practicing of her family's cultivation technique, the Sacred Fire Infinite book. "It is worse than that," Luo Hua said angrily. In fact, even if someone saw her cultivating the Sacred Fire Infinite book, they would find it difficult to tell the level of the Sacred Fire Infinite book. Luo Hua was just being careful, erring on the side of caution. "Worse than that?" Donger opened her tiny mouth and started to stare at Luo Hua with round eyes. She knew she was in great trouble today. Although she had an extremely good relationship with Luo Hua, they were after all still mistress and servant. She knew that her duty was to dedicate herself to serving Luo Hua. "What happened, miss?" Donger uneasily asked. She started praying in her heart, hoping that it was not something unredeemable. Luo Hua's face turned red as she did not know what to say. Even though she and Donger had a very close relationship, Luo Hua would never tell Donger the details of such a shameful event. Did she need to tell Donger about that ruffian who heard the narcissistic words she was saying after he entered the training ground? And on top of that, he completely saw her whole body. Not only that, he had even used a scoundrelly method to escape from her hands. Just thinking about it made Luo Hua feel resentful. She went through such an unacceptable ordeal, and not only was there nowhere for her to vent her frustration, she could not tell anyone what had happened, not even Donger. With nowhere to vent her resentment, Luo Hua started pinching Donger's ears again. But this time, she did not use any strength. "Damn you, Donger, you listen carefully. In the future, when you are guarding the door, you are not allowed to go anywhere else. Also, I will punish you by not allowing you eat buns or any food for the next 10 days. I will only give you an avoiding grain relic." When Luo Hua said this, Donger's face paled in fear. It was as if she was facing the world's most terrifying event. No buns, no food. Donger was too sad for tears. The avoiding grain relic Luo Hua mentioned was a fierce beast relic made specially for replacing meals. It did not have much yuan qi within it, but eating one stopped that person from feeling hungry for 10 days. But the avoiding grain relic had no taste. It was as bland as eating white noodles. Donger felt like she had entered hell when she thought about not having any food for 10 days, having to subsist on just a tasteless relic. "Miss," Donger said in an aggrieved manner as she lightly pulled on Luo Hua's clothes. Her watery eyes seemed to speak for her. "This is not negotiable," Luo Hua said hatefully, but after seeing Donger as if she was about to die, her heart softened. She said, "This time, I will be light on you. The 10 days will be shortened to 5. Saying that, she shook Donger's hand off and stormed angrily towards the Central Divine Tower's administrative office. She wanted to know how could a rascal, who appeared out of nowhere, manage to get the key of the Central Divine Tower's 69th floor training ground. A black-clad beauty was sorting a room list in the Central Divine Tower's administrative office. She looked like she was in her 20s. She had an excellent body and beautiful good looks. The Central Divine Tower was the face of the Tai Divine City, so it was common for her to receive all sorts of guests. As a service staff, every aspect of this beautiful girl was excellent. The black-clad beauty was stunned when Luo Hor stormed into the room angrily to question her. After understanding Luo Huir's question, she chuckled, "Little sister Huir, the person you are talking about is most likely Yi Yun." Back when Yi Yun rented a room at the 69th floor of the Central Divine Tower, this black-clad beauty was the one who took him to see the room. Yi Yun, who was just 13 years old, was able to pay half a year's worth of rent in his first year of entering the Tai Divine City. It was a great shock to the black-clad beauty, so she remembered him very clearly. For him to be so powerful at such a young age, it indicated that he would have a promising future. He was a diamond bachelor, if only she could get him. But this desire of the black-clad girl was just fantasy, and she knew that. Previously, she cultivated in the Tai Divine City for 6 years and her results were terrible when she graduated. It was only because of her beauty that she was able to stay in the Tai Divine City and work in the Central Divine Tower. Yi Yun. He's Yi Yun? Luo Hor did not recognize Yi Yun at all. She knew of Yi Yun only because he was the first person to break a Tai Divine City record in the past 1,000 years. It peeved Luo Huir. When the name Yi Yun was mentioned to 99% of the cultivators in the Tai Divine City, they would either admire him or be jealous of him. Only Luo Hor was bugged by his name. This time, it was that Yi Yun again. Yes, he's Yi Yun, a young man with great achievements, the black-clad girl giggled. He's a tenant of the 69th floor of the Central Divine Tower, so it's natural for him to have the training grounds key. That training ground was originally meant to be shared amongst the adjacent rooms. Oh yes, he's even your neighbor. The black-clad girl was looking at Luo Hor with envy. But when Luo Hor heard this, she felt as if a bronze basin was dropped on her head. Dang! Luo Hor was extremely shocked. I am neighbors with that toad. Did it not mean that she to lower her head whenever she saw that rascal? Heavens! If it was not for what happened today, Luo Hor could completely treat Yi Yun as if he was just air, just like a toad on the side of the road. Although she did not like it, it was alright seeing him. But, after today's event, Yi Yun would have all sorts of images appearing in his mind whenever he met her again. Just thinking of this made Luo Hor go crazy. The black-clad girl apparently did not notice Luo Huir's mood and carried on saying without much thought, "You two are amongst the best geniuses in the recent batches of the Tai Divine City. You two can mix around and share experiences with each other. Hi, I really envy all of you." When Luo Hor heard this, her mouth twitched a few times. Mix around and share experiences? Don't make me laugh. I do not want to be his neighbor. Luo Hor blurted out. She did not expect that Yi Yun could afford to live on the 69th floor of the Central Divine Tower. Eh? The black-clad woman was shocked. Why do you not want to be Yi Yun's neighbor? Yi Yun has already paid for the room, so it is natural for him to be staying at the 69th floor of the Central Divine Tower. There were only a few rooms prepared for cultivators in the 69th floor of the Central Divine Tower. No matter how the rooms were switched, they would still be neighbors. The only way out for her was to move to a higher or lower level. But the rooms situated at the 70th floor and above were not for the Tai Divine City's cultivators. This was because the concentration of Yuan Qi was a waste for low-level warriors. To stay at the 70th floor and above, one had to pay 1 glory point every 2 months. Even though Luo Hor was first on the man roll of honor, she did not have so many glory points to squander. Using glory points in exchange for a place to live was too wasteful. As for moving to the 68th floor, Luo Hor got more angry just thinking about it. Why did she have to move to the 68th floor? If anyone had to move, it was that toad. I will find that kid and settle score. Luo Huar ground her teeth and thought hatefully. At this moment in the Tai A Divine City's herbal mountain, in a place with beautiful scenery, a youth in linen clothes was sitting on the grass, with his back leaning against a tree. He was quietly reading an ancient book. He would gently brush away the occasional fallen leaf. 10,000 Beast Totem, Truth of the Laws. Ian planned on returning to his residence in the Central Divine Tower to continue his research of the two manuals, but when he opened the door, he met a violent girl who nearly killed him. Ian found it puzzling, but there was no doubt that the violent girl's strength was higher than his. Therefore, he decided to avoid the Central Divine Tower temporarily. After that, he came to Herbal Mountain number 60 under the guise of picking herbs. He had to admit that the Chu Royal Residence's Truth of the Laws was a valuable book. The Truth of the Laws did not focus on explaining every single nomological truth's cultivation method. The entire book introduced nomological truths. It was a secret manual that introduced the laws in a general fashion. If he could understand it, it would be a great help for his future when it came to cultivation of the laws. In the introduction of the Truth of the Laws, it explained that the path of martial arts had 3,000 great Tao. Each great Tao could lead to the peak. While some of these great Tao were difficult, others were easy. The powers one could obtain from each route were not the same. These 3,000 great Tao were split into several big categories. The first category was the Tao of weapons. When it came to weapons, there were saber truths, spear truths, and sword truths. All of them came under the classification of the Tao of weapons. Some swordsmen only used swords throughout their lives. Even so, they could still reach the pinnacle of martial arts with just swords. Similarly, it was possible with spears, sabers, and polearms. Ian understood that the saber truth's 32 words in the saber tomb were left behind by an expert who had reached an unfathomable level at saber truths. Chapter 263, Ian's Tao. After the way of the weapons, there was the second large category, the laws of the 5 elements. The 5 elements, metal, wood, water, fire and earth, could be cultivated to an extreme and pushed to the pinnacle of martial arts. If one could combine the 5 elements into one could go one step further. Besides the 5 elements, there were the laws of nature. One could use the powers of nature such as wind, snow, thunder and lightning and the power of crumbling mountains and tsunamis. Once the laws of nature were cultivated to an extreme, they could also be combined into one. A warrior could become an embodiment of heaven and earth, holding on to the power of the Creator. The aforementioned 3 laws were the most common cultivation techniques. They were not considered difficult to master, but they were still promising as one went higher. 90% of the warriors in the Tai A Divine Kingdom chose from these 3 categories, focusing on a particular law. After the 3 big categories, there were some relatively rare laws. Many laws in Great Tao often came in pairs, for example, hard-soft, fake-real, space-time, yin-yang, life-death, cause-effect, being void, murder and redemption, ephemeral-eternal. Yun kept reading. The 3,000 Great Tao of martial arts were all-inclusive. A typical warrior would only choose one of them, and at best, just a few. Every path in the 3,000 Great Tao contained endless mysteries. A warrior could spend his entire lifetime and still not be able to glimpse at every secret. If one chose too many laws, it could result in one becoming too distracted, preventing one from accomplishing greater things. Ian read the introduction to every law, as well as their properties and principles which were recorded in the Truth of the Laws. The Truth of the Laws was a foundational description. Only 16 types were described in detail amongst the 3,000 Great Tao. Different Tao had their own differing qualities. The highest grade amongst the 3,000 Great Tao was the Great Tao of Origins. There were very few types of Great Tao of Origins. It exceeded the normal Great Tao, and was king amongst the 3,000 Great Taos. It was very difficult to have an initial foothold in the Great Tao of Origins. It was also quite difficult to comprehend, master or break through.
Just finding a mystic technique that dealt with the great Tao of origins was nearly impossible. Even the sages in the Tai Divine Kingdom rarely managed to see a book that dealt with the great Tao of origins.
A typical warrior would not choose the great Tao of origins when practicing martial arts.
It was tantamount to blocking their own martial arts careers. In human history, there were no lack of elites from super family clans that chose to focus on the great Tao of origins because of their exceeding talent. But due to their inability to succeed, they had to change to a lower grade law, resulting in wasted time. In this world, there were people who tried to gain understanding in the high realm of the great Tao of origins. These people would usually begin with a normal great Tao, and only when they became a sage and exceeded peers on the same level as them would they choose to try to understand the great Tao of origins. If they had any success, they could go a step further, becoming a great emperor. They would then become a giant of the human race, allowing them to exceed a divine kingdom, being respected by all. Below the great Tao of origins, there were second-ranked great Tao.
They were named great Tao of supremacy.
The so-called supremacy was supremacy below origins.
For example, Spacetime Tao, Yin-Yang Taiji Tao, Life-Death Tao, Immortality Tao.
The great Tao of supremacy were also extremely difficult. But compared to the great Tao of origins, they were slightly easier. There were also many more known cultivation technique manuals for them. Below the great Tao of supremacy, they were no longer named great Tao, but instead named laws. For example, the laws of the 5 elements, metal, wood, water, fire, earth, the natural laws of wind, rain, thunder, and lightning. These were all known as high-grade laws. Below high-grade laws were the lowest grades amongst the 3,000 great Tao. They were just normal laws.
Hard-soft laws, fast-slow concepts, mountain-river concepts, vibrational laws were all considered normal laws. Young warriors with exceptional talent would slowly grasp normal laws in the purple blood realm.
When they reached the Yuan Foundation realm, they would be relatively skilled at using the laws.
Of course, it was not easy to understand normal laws to an extreme limit.
There was no limit to laws. In the history of the Tai Divine Kingdom, many sages focused on normal laws. But even in the realm of sages, they were far from being able to cultivate any normal law to an extreme.
Yi Yun browsed through the truth of the laws in its entirety once.
The 16 laws described within the truth of the laws were the 5 elements: hard-soft, fast-slow, wind-lightning, starlight, yin-yang, murder, and redemption. The more great Tao of laws one cultivated and the more thoroughly one understood them, the closer one would get to reaching the pinnacle of martial arts. Yi Yun clearly understood that he had to go slow. Although he had the purple crystal origins helping him and had a promising future ahead of him, his martial arts path was still in its infancy.
He could not be too greedy, for many warriors would only focus on one great Tao of laws in their entire life.
After a lot of comparison, Yi Yun decided on his final choice, Pure Yang Tao. The Pure Yang Tao was part of the Yin Yang Tao, which was a great Tao of supremacy. When the universe was in its formative stages, the primordial universe, Wuji, generated supreme ultimate, Taiji, and therefore generates the opposing forces. The two opposites generate the 4 images.
This primordial universe was chaos, and chaos was a great Tao of origins, and the two opposites were yin-yang, which was a great Tao of supremacy. By the evolution of pure yin and pure yang, they formed everything that existed in the universe.
The yin-yang Tao was extremely difficult and profound. This was a reason why many elites failed at learning the Tai sacred technique. After establishing his first goal of practicing the pure Yang Tao, his direction in condensing an aspect totem was then also decided.
That was to hunt pure Yang desolate beasts to form a pure Yang totem.
When Yi Yun chose the 10,000 beast totem, what mattered the most to him was that the 10,000 beast totem had no restrictions based on laws. There was no requirement on what type of primordial species had to be killed for the 10,000 beast totem. Unlike the 5 elements divine totem and the Book of the Stars, they were based on the 5 elemental laws and the powers of the stars respectively. The cultivation technique designated a strict path for a warrior.
Cultivation techniques were rare. High-level cultivation techniques like the 5 Elements Divine Totem and the Book of the Stars were invaluable. Many warriors would restrict their own martial path by accommodating the cultivation technique, but Yi Yun was not like that. I want to gain an understanding of the pure Yang Dao and cultivate the 10,000 Beast Totem. At the same time, I need to cultivate the next few volumes of the Taiya Sacred Technique. Not only that, I also need to learn the Desolate Heaven Technique. I have so many things to learn. Yi Yun could perfectly control the energy within a desolate beast thanks to the purple crystal, so it was half the work with double the results when it came to mastering the Desolate Heaven Technique. The Desolate Heaven Technique was a supplementary skill that greatly helped one's cultivation, so Yi Yun would definitely not miss out on it. Yi Yun had previously obtained a copy of a Desolate Heaven Master Manual when he and Lin Xintong separated. In the past 6 months, Yi Yun would read the contents within the Desolate Heaven Master Manual whenever he had time. Although Yi Yun had never systematically practiced the Desolate Heaven Technique, he had a general understanding of it. The Taiya Divine City also has lessons that teach the Desolate Heaven Technique. It's not too late for me to start now. Yi Yun decided to report for a Desolate Heaven Technique class starting tomorrow. At the same time, he would progress in his cultivation of laws and aspect totems. With his future path decided, Yi Yun took the remnant pages of the 10,000 Beast Totem and began trying to gain an understanding of the contents in the 10,000 Beast Totem. Those who could pay the 9,000 dragon scale runes would be people with some attainment in the Desolate Heaven Technique. As for those who just wanted to see Grandmaster Yue Hua, they would stop here as no one would pay 9,000 dragon scale runes just to join in for fun. Although the tuition fees were expensive, there was an additional provision. This made many Desolate Heaven Technique apprentices had something to look forward to. There was a scholarship award. Those who attended Grandmaster Yue Hua's class and obtained outstanding results as well as the affirmation of Grandmaster Yue Hua would receive a scholarship. This scholarship was funded from the tuition fees collected from the rest. If anyone could break any Desolate Heaven Technique related record in the Taiya Divine City, the tuition fees would be permanently waived. In addition, they would be given 8,000 dragon scale runes worth of Desolate Heaven Technique materials every month. This allowance could be stacked. Breaking one record would have one's tuition fees waived and be awarded a monthly allowance of 8,000 dragon scale runes. By breaking 2 records, the tuition fees of 9,000 dragon scale runes would be returned, and with the double allowance, one would get 25,000 dragon scale runes a month. This additional provision tempted many. But even a fool knew that this last provision was customized for Luo Hua. This scholarship system could even be considered as a way to reward and win the favor of Luo Hua by the Taiya Divine Kingdom's royal family. Besides Luo Hua, who else could break a Desolate Heaven Technique related record? Learning the Desolate Heaven Technique was a resource-burning trade. And materials used was a large proportion of the heavy costs. Many Desolate Heaven Masters may be ranked ahead in the Man Roll of Honor, and have a lot of dragon scale runes, but they would still think twice before spending them. They lived their lives on a tight budget. With Grandmaster Yue Hua establishing a scholarship system, if Luo Hua was to break another record, then the materials needed for her future practicing of the Desolate Heaven Technique could be used without any monetary concern. Many Desolate Heaven Technique apprentices could only sigh when they thought of this. Luo Hua's was a genius whose Desolate Heaven Technique left them in the dust. The original intent of the establishment of the Taiya Divine City was to gather resources to groom geniuses. It was fair competition. Those who could not gain the resources could only blame themselves. The registration for Elder Yue Hua's class began. Although the tuition fees were expensive, there were still many who registered for it. Although the cultivators, ranked ahead on the Man Roll of Honor and focusing on their Desolate Heaven Technique, felt the pinch of paying 9,000 dragon scale runes a month, they could still afford it. Once 9,000 dragon scale runes were paid, each person would receive a small lecture token. Very quickly a few dozen lecture tokens were handed out, but there was still a long line. It was natural that there would be many attendees for Elder Yuehwa's first lesson. When the lecture tokens were almost completely handed out, many people had begun leaving. At this time, Yi-Yun dawdled into the administration office, intending to receive a lecture token. The clerk in charge of handing out the lecture tokens recognized Yi-Yun. Seeing Yi-Yun asking for a lecture token, the clerk's expression turned odd. He reminded Yi-Yun, "This is a lesson for Desolate Heaven Master apprentices." He was afraid that Yi-Yun had made a mistake. After all, Yi-Yun should have been attending lessons for warriors that taught laws, cultivation techniques or aspect totem. "Ah, I know," Yi-Yun said and handed over his identity token, intending to pay the 9,000 dragon scale runes. Seeing the dragon scale runes fly up, the clerk froze for a moment before asking, "You know the Desolate Heaven technique?" The clerk was very aware of Yi-Yun's Cloud Wilderness background. He was poor. And to learn the Desolate Heaven technique, it needed the support of plenty of resources. Considering Yi-Yun's martial arts talent was so monstrous, it was unlikely that he could also have learned the Desolate Heaven technique. "I don't really know." Yi-Yun shook his head, and then said matter-of-factly, "I'm learning because I don't know." Eh? Hearing Yi-Yun's words, the clerk nearly choked. "Learning because I don't know?" These words, which sounded completely logical, made the clerk speechless. A rookie, who was completely clueless of the Desolate Heaven technique, actually wanted to attend Grandmaster Yuehwa lecture. That was a 3-lesson course that cost 9,000 dragon scale runes. He knew that Yi-Yun was extremely rich after the rookie ranking competition. He could only sigh at the fact that one could be so capricious when one was rich. No matter how much the tuition fees were, he could learn it if he was interested. At this moment, in the central divine tower, Luo Hor was lying comfortably in bed. She was playing a small token in her hands. She did not pick up a lecture token because someone had sent the lecture token directly to Luo Hor. Luo Hor was extremely satisfied with this. This was not about running errands or the waiving of tuition fees, it was a matter of face. As the Tai A Divine City's most perfect girl genius, how could she not receive any special treatment? "Miss, in the future we will get a monthly allowance of 8,000 dragon scale runes. This Grandmaster Yuehwa sure is a nice person." Maid-servant Donger was looking at Luo Hor. She had not eaten for 2 days now. Although she had eaten the grain-avoiding relic and wasn't hungry, she still felt that her mouth and stomach were empty. She wished that Luo Hor would absolve her of her punishment in her good mood. Luo Hor rolled her eyes at Donger and said, "What's 8,000 dragon scale runes of allowance? It's far from enough for me to spend. Wait till I break another Desolate Heaven technique record and receive 25,000 dragon scale runes in monthly allowance. I might even break a third record and receive 42,000 dragon scale runes in allowance. When that happens, I can practice the Desolate Heaven technique however I like." "Yes, yes. Miss is the best." Donger began kissing ass. At the same time, she was eagerly looking at Luo Hor with her big eyes. Luo Hor snorted, "I know what you are thinking. I'll absolve you of the next 2 days of punishment. Follow me to class tomorrow." Of course, Donger could not enter the lecture hall. All she could do was wait outside. As such, under all the anticipation, Grandmaster Yuehwa's course began. The classroom was located underground in the central divine tower. A large Desolate Heaven technique hall with an area of 1,000 square meters was used as the classroom. In the large hall, there were all sorts of desolate bone relic arrays, cauldrons as well as rows of stone tables. All sorts of valuable materials were placed on the tables. Just the layout and materials made many feel that the 9,000 monthly tuition fee was not that expensive after all. Practicing the Desolate Heaven technique was a huge drain on resources, but in this class, the materials were provided free of charge. Many cultivators had arrived in the lecture hall an hour early. They had an expectant mood as they waited for Grandmaster Yuehwa to appear. There were a total of 106 cultivators in this class. When Luo Hor entered the room, there were already almost 100 people present. When Luo Hor appeared, it naturally caused a stir. It's Luo Hor. When someone said that, everyone's eyes turned towards the classroom's entrance. Luo Hor was wearing a purple Desolate Heaven master robe. She was like a different person in public. Slowly walking over, her every action was elegant, exuding the air of someone from a high-class family. Chapter 265, Enemies Meet Again. In the purple Desolate Heaven master robe, Luo Hor looked extremely bright and lovely. Her gracefulness made her look like a proud peacock. The cultivators who could pay the tuition fee were all elites who had a bright future ahead of them. Some of them even came from reclusive family clans. But in front of Luo Hor, they immediately turned inferior. They were like the green leaves growing beside a beautiful flower. But these elites did not mind this. They were happy to be served as Luo Hor's foil. Luo Hor, who was like the bright sun at midday, not only had extremely high talent in the Desolate Heaven technique, she was very beautiful as well. If they could marry her, it would be a great thing. Not only would they then have a beauty in their arms, they would also raise their own positions in their family by marrying Luo Hor. Miss Luo, I had reserved a table at the Divine Moon restaurant, hoping that Miss Luo would grace herself there, but Miss Luo didn't come. I wonder if Miss Luo will give me face and appear tomorrow. Yang Yefeng said with a smile as he came forward when Luo Hor approached her seat. Yang Yefeng assumed that he would be unable to persuade Luo Hor into joining the Chu royal residence. He also knew that it was extremely difficult to win Luo Hor's heart, but hard work had to be injected into everything. Who knows if it might succeed or not? Luo Hor, however, treated Yang Yefeng and the rest of these young masters who thought highly of themselves as toads. Just as she was thinking up an excuse to humor Yang Yefeng, she noticed a figure. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a youth in linen clothes walking into the classroom after pushing the main door open. Compared to all the others present, dressed in beautiful Desolate Heaven master robes, this youth's clothes were very simple. Although the cultivators in the Tai Divine City did not judge a person by the way they dressed, it was still unfitting to dress in linen while attending a noble Desolate Heaven master class. It was like a dance ball where people were decked out in elaborate costumes, but a person appeared in uncouth clothes. Wearing a Desolate Heaven master robe was a gesture of respect to Grandmaster Yuehua, who was about to show up. Seeing this youth, Luo Hor was stunned. Yang Yefeng, who was beside Luo Hor, was also stunned. Isn't that Yi Yun? What was he doing here? Was he here to learn the Desolate Heaven technique? Luo Hor was stunned, but only for a moment. Her face then turned red. Her face, which had a deliberate smile on it, had now frozen. At this moment, Yi Yun, who had just closed the main door and turned around, also spotted Luo Hor. The both of them stared at each other. Yi Yun was a bit surprised. It's her? Back when he met Luo Hor in the Central Divine Tower, Yi Yun did not give it much thought. But after seeing Luo Hor for a second time in Grandmaster Yuehua's class, Yi Yun suddenly had an idea of who she was. A cultivator who practiced the Desolate Heaven technique and lived at the 69th floor of the Central Divine Tower could only be the first person on the man roll of honor, Luo Hor. Yi Yun had naturally heard of the recent events surrounding Luo Hor. The royal family's Desolate Heaven master Grandmaster Yuehua had purposely come to the Tai Divine City because Luo Hor caught her attention. Yet, Yi Yun had seen Luo Hor's wardrobe malfunction and he had told her, "Beauty, I can see your breasts." Thinking of this, Yi Yun's expression turned wonderful. He could not help but think of the scene he saw that day. Yi Yun subconsciously glanced at Luo Hor's perky female peaks. This was purely out of reflex, but this tiny movement of his eyes was caught by Luo Hor, who had extremely sharp senses. Luo Hor turned extremely angry. Her face had turned from red to green as she clenched her tiny fists. If not for the people present, she would have stormed away. Instantly, the atmosphere turned heated. Luo Hor's eyes seemed to give off sparks.
Yi Yun could feel the killing intent and quickly looked away in an ashamed manner. It was as if nothing had happened.
This happened under everyone's watchful eye.
Many were baffled at Luo Huier's stare at Yi Yun.
Had something happened between Luo Huier and Yi Yun?
Yi Yun felt uncomfortable being stared at by Luo Huier. He opened his mouth, thinking of giving an apology. But at this moment, he heard a Yuan Qi voice transmission from Luo Huier: "If you say anything about that day, you will die."
Yi Yun gave a wry smile.
He knew that it was a big deal if a girl's body was seen by others in this world. If she was seen by a man she liked, that might still be acceptable, but that wasn't the case if she was seen by a male stranger. Even the girls in Yi Yun's previous life, who valued their chastity, would find it difficult to accept that. Furthermore, Luo Huier was an extremely proud girl that was anything but ordinary. She definitely treated her body as something extremely important.
"You must be Miss Luo Huier. I am very sorry for that day.
I did not know you were inside, neither was it intentional.
As for that matter, I will never mention it to anyone." Yi Yun used his Yuan Qi to transmit his voice, with a very sincere tone.
"Humph."
Luo Huier sneered. "It wasn't intentional? Then it wasn't intentional today?"
What Luo Huier was referring to was Yi Yun's glance at her breasts just a moment ago.
Yi Yun had no way of refuting it.
His glance was purely a male reflective instinct. It did not go through the brain, it was something the eyes would do by themselves. But his skin was not so thick to say that that was not intentional. "You are not allowed to stay at the 69th floor of the Central Divine Tower," Luo Huier suddenly said with a Yuan Qi voice transmission. Now, Luo Huier was slowly calming down.
She could not do anything to Yi Yun.
She could neither kill him just because her body had been seen, nor because her shameless, narcissistic words had been heard.
But Luo Huier did not wish to see Yi Yun. Just seeing Yi Yun made her feel awkward and depressed.
Therefore, she did not want to be neighbors with Yi Yun.
"You won't allow me to stay at the 69th floor?" Yi Yun frowned.
He may have apologized, but he did not like to be ordered around. It is the freedom of people to choose to stay in the Central Divine Tower. "If Miss Luo doesn't want to see me, you can move to the 70th floor. Luo Huier was at a loss of words by Yi Yun's counter.
Moving to the 70th floor required glory points.
Although Luo Huier was rich, she could not afford to spend glory points like that. Seeing Luo Huier's face turn green and then white, Yang Yefeng could no longer stand watching this any further. He had originally been speaking with Luo Huier and was thinking of inviting her to the Divine Moon restaurant for a meal. Just as he was looking forward to the answer from Luo Huier, Yi Yun had entered, absorbing all of Luo Huier's attention. The two of them had been staring at each other for more than 10 seconds. From the looks of it, they were likely communicating with Yuan Qi voice transmissions.
Was it possible that this poor kid from the Cloud Wilderness had some dealings with Luo Huier?
Yang Yefeng had previously been ridiculed by Yi Yun and had wanted to deal with him. Now, having seen the goddess in his heart being involved with Yi Yun, how could Yang Yefeng feel pleasant?
He immediately took a step forward and stood in the middle of Yi Yun and Luo Huier. "Kid, what are you doing here?" Yang Yefeng questioned Yi Yun. Yi Yun's attention was completely on Luo Huier previously.
Only when Yang Yefeng appeared did he see him.
"Oh? Isn't this the retarded young master from the Chu royal residence who wanted to use 20,000 dragon scale runes to exchange for the truth of the laws?"
Right, when he gave his self-introduction, he did mention that he was a Desolate Heaven master.
His Desolate Heaven technique is not bad and he ranks 10th on the man roll of honor. It's no wonder he appeared here. These thoughts flashed across Yi Yun's mind. He could not be bothered with Yang Yefeng.
Sensing Yi Yun's disregard of him, Yang Yefeng's forehead popped a blue vein.
"Kid, are you deaf? I was asking you a question." Yi Yun glanced at Yang Yefeng and coldly said, "Aren't you asking a nonsensical question? Since I'm here, naturally it's to attend the class. Hearing Yi-Yun say he was speaking nonsense, Yang Yefeng's face sank. Attending the class? You? This is a place to learn the Desolate Heaven technique, taught personally by Grandmaster Yue Hua. Do you even know the Desolate Heaven technique? Yang Yefeng was aggressive and Yi-Yun impatiently replied, so what if I do? And so what if I don't? Is there a rule saying that one needs to know the Desolate Heaven technique to attend the class? With Yi-Yun's rebuttal, all the Desolate Heaven master apprentices were dumbfounded. From Yi-Yun's words, it was clear he did not know the Desolate Heaven technique. It was normal if one thought further about it. With Yi-Yun's experiences, how could he know the Desolate Heaven technique? But he actually spent 9,000 dragon scale runes to attend Grandmaster Yue Hua's class, without even knowing the Desolate Heaven technique? Ha ha ha. Yang Yefeng laughed as if he had heard the world's funniest joke. You don't know the Desolate Heaven technique and you actually came here to listen to the lecture? Do you think you are worthy? This ridiculousness goes to an extreme. Yang Yefeng was a talented Desolate Heaven master, so he had his pride. The Desolate Heaven technique was his field. He may not have as great a talent in martial arts compared to Yi-Yun, but he was a king when it came to the Desolate Heaven technique. Yi-Yun was simply looking to suffer by entering a field that he dominated. Yang Yefeng had already bore a grudge from back when he was ridiculed by Yi-Yun when he tried to get back the truth of the laws. He was thinking of a way to seek revenge, but now Yi-Yun had came to his door, which greatly suited him. Yi-Yun could not be bothered with Yang Yefeng and walked past Yang Yefeng and found a seat. All the Desolate Heaven master apprentices were giving odd looks at Yi-Yun. This dude was too weird. He did not know the Desolate Heaven technique, yet here he was to join in on the fun. Did he not have anywhere to spend his money? A person's looks were 30% nature and 70% nurture. Ordinary ladies from rich families would most likely be more beautiful than a poor girl. This was because they were particular about their etiquette and did not do any chores. Because of that, their skin and body lines were much better. But no matter how rich a mortal lady was, she would not be comparable to the elite females of the martial world. These girls would inherit a good bloodline from their family. In their future growth, they also had heaven earth yuan qi as well as all sorts of elixirs to nourish themselves with. These things allowed many of them to develop their bodies to near perfection. Their skin would be perfect like white jade and their figures would be developed perfectly due to yuan qi. They would not be like mortal girls, who would end up overly thin or fat due to poor nourishment. For example, Grandmaster Yue Hua had extremely good talent. This, accompanied with the fact that she was still young when she broke through to become a sage, allowed her to maintain her youth for a long time. From today onwards, I will be your Desolate Heaven technique teacher, Yue Hua said without much expression while standing in front of the hall, tapping the disc array on the stone stage lightly. Her voice was gentle, but due to her lack of expression, she somehow exuded a charm. Immediately, many of the youths below the stage went into a daze. For 16-year-old youths, who were extremely energetic, a mature woman's charm was more deadly than a young girl's. Teacher Yue Hua is so pretty. Also, she looks very young. Some people private transmitted their voices. Female warriors tended to be more concerned about their looks. In the world of warriors, there were many ways to ensure eternal youth. In the next few years, I will be teaching in the Tai A Divine City. I will teach you everything about the Desolate Heaven technique. If you have the ability, you can even learn my 1,000-hand Moon Buddha. When Yue Hua mentioned the 1,000-hand Moon Buddha, many of those who knew about this mystic technique could not help but gasp. In the world of Desolate Heaven masters, there were also cultivation techniques and mystic techniques. These were mainly used to extract and refine energy. The 1,000-hand Moon Buddha was a set of hand seals. Once it was performed, one would end up seeing the shadows of hand seals due to the extreme speed. This was Grandmaster Yue Hua's specialty. By using this set of hand seals, it was extremely easy to extract and refine desolate bones,
The Thousand-Hand Moon Buddha was an opportunity Grandmaster Yuehua had chanced upon while she was enduring a training expedition. It was also the foundation of why Grandmaster Yuehua had such accomplishments in the Desolate Heaven technique. It was unexpected that she would be willing to teach it to others. But it was obvious that to reach Grandmaster Yuehua's standards would be almost impossible. This Thousand-Hand Moon Buddha was most likely prepared to be taught to Luo Huier. It's pointless for us to think about it. People began privately transmitting voices. Grandmaster Yuehua's rapid arrival in the Taya Divine City was equivalent to taking in Luo Huier as a disciple. She had set many standards that were tailored for Luo Huier. When they thought of that, many of them could not help but be disappointed. It was unlikely that they could learn the Thousand-Hand Moon Buddha. At this moment, Grandmaster Yuehua carried on, "All of you differ greatly in talent and foundation. I need to roughly understand what they are to teach according to your aptitudes. Now, I will give you 2 hours to use the disc array on your stone table and the materials stored in the cabinet. Choose your best Desolate Heaven technique and show it to me." When Yuehua finished saying that, she gently brushed her purple robe and sat down on a chair. When the young cultivators under the stage heard this, they immediately lit up. Especially those who were very confident in their Desolate Heaven technique, they began to rub their hands. They were all thinking about how to catch Yuehua's attention at the beginning of the class. In the future, even if they did not have the chance to learn the Thousand-Hand Moon Buddha, it would at least make it easier for them to win the scholarship award. This would make their training go even smoother. Many people could not wait to take out the desolate bone materials from the cabinet. They chose the materials that suited them and were prepared to refine their desolate bone relic they were best at. But at this moment, in the corner of the classroom, Yun was dumbstruck when he heard Yuehua's words. Refine a desolate bone relic? He did not even know the most basic sealing methods. How could he refine a desolate bone relic? The things written in Su Jie's notebook were stuff he could not even use at his beginner stage. Yun took out some sections of desolate bones, but he did not recognize any of the desolate bone materials. At this moment, many people beside Yun were already busying themselves. They were all focused and doing their best. Yun was the only one who was without action. It made him stand out. While Yun was in a daze, Yang Yefeng was about to refine his specialty, the 7 treasure totem relic. This relic helped in the condensing of an aspect totem. It could increase the success rate of forming an aspect before Yuan by 5%. This was the best Desolate Heaven technique that Yang Yefeng could do. He was confident that with the 7 treasure totem relic, not many people would be able to exceed him except people like Luo Huier and a handful of other people. As for Yun, how could this trash compare with him? Yang Yefeng gave Yun a glance and noticed that he was in a daze. In this situation, Yun was really in a daze. This retard, Yang Yefeng said in his mind. If not for Grandmaster Yuehua being present, he would have laughed loudly and ridiculed Yun. Yun's retardedness had exceeded his imagination. Yang Yefeng had originally thought that Yun was able to do a thing or two. He never expected that Yun would have no knowledge of the Desolate Heaven technique, yet Yun actually came to Grandmaster Yuehua's class to shame himself. He sure was a dumb pig. Unfortunately, at the level of dumbness that this kid was, it was unlikely that Yun would be able to know the level of the 7 treasured totem relic he was going to refine. To show off his skills in front of a pig felt meaningless. It was really quite pointless subjugating such a person. Yang Yefeng shook his head and no longer looked at Yun. He carried on focusing on the refining of the 7 treasure totem relic. There was a non-trivial failure rate for refining the 7 treasure totem relic, so he had to concentrate to succeed. Not only Yang Yefeng, even Luo Huier had noticed Yun. Seeing Yun staying motionless, Luo Huier was delighted. She gloated and said to herself, "This toad is way too inferior. He has decent talent for martial arts, yet he came to the Desolate Heaven Master class to shame himself. I really don't know what he's thinking."
Luo Huier quickly stopped caring about Yi Yun. She had already chosen the desolate bone relic she wanted to refine. She wanted to show off her talent, letting everyone see what Luo Huier's desolate heaven technique was. Yi Yun carried on in his dazed state, and this also fell into Yuehua's eyes. At the beginning, Yuehua thought that Yi Yun was preparing his state of mind, as it was normal for many desolate heaven masters to sit quietly for a while before refining a desolate bone relic. But after 15 minutes, Yi Yun was still standing there motionless. Yuehua gave a slight frown and stood up before walking towards Yi Yun. Chapter 267, Power of Desolate's Extraction. What are you doing? Yuehua walked to the front of Yi Yun. She was tall, standing at a height of 1.75 m. Coupled with her powerful aura, it made people feel a sense of being suppressed. I'm sorry, Teacher Yuehua. I do not know how to refine a bone relic. Yi Yun shrugged. You don't know? Yuehua was surprised. She never expected that there would be a student like this. If you do not know how to refine a bone relic, you should at least know how to create seals. You can first refine the desolate bones. It is all right if you are unable to form a relic. Yuehua looked at Yi Yun's age. He was approximately 13 years old. Real geniuses, who began learning the desolate heaven technique, would be able to refine bone relics at this age. If he could not refine one, then it could be said that he was not suitable to learn the desolate heaven technique. Yi Yun still shook his head. I do not know how to form the seals either. Oh? Yuehua raised her eyebrows. What are you doing in my class if you do not know anything? She did not ask this question out loud, but it was clear what she was thinking from her facial expression. Yi Yun explained, I am a beginner. I previously read some literature on the desolate heaven technique and I am very interested in learning it, so I came to Teacher Yuehua's class to learn. Beginner? When Yuehua heard Yi Yun's words, she was slightly stunned. He spent 9,000 dragon scale runes to attend her class out of interest? This young man was quite interesting. Yuehua did not think that Yi Yun was crazy. In fact, she appreciated Yi Yun for his courage in doing whatever he wanted to do. Besides, this youth took out 9,000 dragon scale runes without even blinking his eyes just for his own personal interest. It meant that he had other things he excelled in. But despite appreciating him, Yuehua did not think that Yi Yun would be able to learn the desolate heaven technique from her. Her class was meant for students with a foundation. The lessons she held would be fast-paced. How could Yi Yun, who was a beginner, keep up with them? Yuehua said, having courage is good, but you must still be able to recognize your own abilities. My classes will not be taught at a slower speed just because of you. There might be many things that you will be unable to completely understand. For this class, you can just listen by the side. If you think my class is pointless after the class is over, I can get someone to return your tuition fee. Yuehua felt that Yi Yun was like an ignorant newborn calf, unafraid of tigers. He did not know himself, but even so she appreciated such a hot-blooded youth. Due to this, she took care of Yi Yun. When Yi Yun heard this, he got a favorable impression of this beautiful desolate heaven master. He said, Thank you, Teacher Yuehua, I will still try. Alright, up to you. Yuehua did not bother with Yi Yun anymore and walked towards Luo Huier. Luo Huier was the person she was most concerned about. Yuehua stood beside Luo Huier for a long time, watching every seal Luo Huier made carefully. There was an undisguised appreciation of Luo Huier in her eyes. She had come to the Tai Divine City especially for Luo Huier. This girl was a desolate heaven technique genius that only appeared in the Tai Divine Kingdom once every several tens of thousands of years. 2 hours quickly passed. Only about half of the desolate heaven master apprentices managed to complete their desolate bone relic refinement. The others either failed in their refinement or failed to complete it in the designated time. Most of the desolate bone relics completed were made for Purple Blood Realm warriors. Only a few of them were for Yuan Foundation Realm warriors.
For example, Yang Yefeng's 7 treasure totem relic was meant for early-stage Yuan Foundation realm warriors, to aid them in condensing an aspect totem. But compared to Luo Huayer's relic, it was nothing. Luo Huayer placed her disc array down at the last moment. A purple desolate bone relic rolled around playfully in the disc array. Seeing the purple desolate bone relic, the surrounding desolate heaven master apprentices did not know what to say. Luo Huayer had refined a purple heart for getting dust relic. It could be used by peak Yuan Foundation realm warriors to break through to a higher level. Compared to the other relics, it was on a completely different level. If a desolate heaven master had Luo Huayer's current standard, that person could become an esteemed guest in a large family clan. All the relics were examined by Yue Hua. Even the failed desolate bone relics were examined by Yue Hua. She would even occasionally give some pointers, telling them the reason for their failure. This made many of those who were given pointers feel overwhelmingly flattered. These were pointers given by a sage-level desolate heaven master. Every word said by Yue Hua was remembered and repeated in the minds of everyone. Only Yi Yun did not receive any of Yue Hua's pointers because he did not even have a failed product. In the past 2 hours, Yi Yun did not do anything from beginning to the end. Many of the apprentices were embarrassed when they saw Yi Yun standing there like a wooden pole. They all felt that if they were the ones in Yi Yun's shoes, they would feel like they were sitting on a bed of nails. TSK, this kid's psyche sure is good. Doesn't he feel awkward standing there sillily? That's right, even I feel bad for the kid. He truly doesn't belong to the same group as us. What's the point in staying here stubbornly? He probably cannot even understand Grandmaster Yue Hua's pointers. It's really hard on him. Yi Yun really did not fit in amongst a group of desolate heaven master apprentices. It was like a group of geniuses, who had gathered together to discuss poetry and arts, suddenly had an old farmer intrude amongst them, but the old farmer was unable to say anything regarding the poems. All he could discuss with others was how much grain he could collect in his farm, or the number of chicken eggs his hens had laid. What was the point of making himself uncomfortable? All the youths present were between 14 to 17 years of age. They had great self-esteem and were at the point in life where they wished to strongly express themselves. If they were in Yi Yun's shoes, they would not even be able to endure a second, they would have left a long time ago. This idiot. Yang Yefeng gave a dismissive glance at Yi Yun. He could no longer be bothered with Yi Yun. At this point, Yi Yun was still hanging in here stubbornly, spending 9,000 dragon scale runes to be in this awkward scenario. Wasn't this signs of madness? It was impossible to win against a madman because one had to have the same thoughts as a madman. Just as Yang Yefeng began to think highly of himself, Grandmaster Yue Hua came to Yang Yefeng. Yang Yefeng bowed and passed his product with anticipation. Yue Hua gave it a few looks before giving him a few pointers. Although there were no obvious compliments, those affirming words made Yang Yefeng feel honored. He secretly looked at Luo Huayer, hoping that Luo Huayer would notice him, but he was disappointed. Yang Yefeng still did not lose heart. He knew the extreme difficulty of pursuing Luo Huayer. He did not hold out much hope for it. All he hoped was that even if he could not win her heart, he would at least be able to form a cordial relationship with Luo Huayer. This would be extremely beneficial for his future. I have a rough understanding of everyone's desolate heaven technique standard. Now, I will begin teaching and I will start with the most basic thing, extraction of energy. Yue Hua returned to the stage after inspecting everyone's product. The first step to refining a desolate bone relic was to extract the energy from a desolate bone. This first step was extremely important. If the extraction of energy was not done well, then it would be a waste no matter how good the desolate bone materials were. The subsequent steps of energy control, purification, activation and so forth would then become impossible to discuss. Yue Hua continued, there are about 10 common, basic methods to energy extraction. They all have their own advantages.
Besides that, different schools of desolate heaven techniques would have their own mystic techniques. These mystic techniques are to increase the power of desolate's extraction efficiency. In addition, there are many personal extraction methods. If you reach an even higher level, you will even be able to combine several basic methods to create your own extraction mystic technique. Of course, that is very difficult. Many famous grandmasters find it difficult to do so. It may be difficult, but in the history of the Tai Divine Kingdom, there have been many desolate heaven masters about your age who managed to create their own extraction mystic technique. This kind of extraction mystic technique are only suitable for oneself. You can say that it can only be understood and not be taught. When Grandmaster Yue Hua finished saying this, her gaze landed on Luo Hui'er. It was clear what she meant. She wished that Luo Hui'er would create a miracle by developing her own extraction mystic technique. Only Luo Hui'er amongst those present had the ability to do so. Luo Hui'er knew Yue Hua's thoughts and clenched her tiny fists. There were 3 major steps in the desolate heaven technique. The first step, power of desolate's extraction. The second step, controlling the power of desolate's seal. The third step, forming the relic itself. The most basic part laid in the first step. She was determined to figure out an extraction mystic technique of her own. This was an extremely important part of her desolate heaven master career. Seeing Luo Hui'er's determined and ambitious gaze, Grandmaster Yue Hua nodded in a satisfactory manner. She then said, "In today's class, I will only be talking about energy extraction. At the end of the lesson, there will be a little test. In the future, I will have a test at the end of every class. Your test scores will be recorded down by me for your final grade. Those who have outstanding grades will be rewarded by me." Test? When they heard Yue Hua speaking about tests, some became nervous while others became excited. As for Luo Hui'er and Yang Yefeng, they were undoubtedly the type of people who were excited. Test? My favorite. Chapter 268, Test. The cultivators' spirits rose when they heard that there would be a test after the lesson ended. If they could gain the appreciation of Yue Hua, they might get the chance to learn Yue Hua's thousand-hand moon Buddha on top of earning the high-value scholarship. A mystic technique of that level was the dream of the cultivators present. Yue Hua said, "These 10 basic extraction methods are the basics for all sorts of mystic techniques and their variants. Although they are known as the basics, they are not simple at all. Not to mention beginners who just began learning the desolate heaven technique, even grandmasters who have been well versed in the desolate heaven technique for a very long time, might occasionally make a few mistakes. Now, I will explain all the 10 extraction methods once. You can compare it with what you have previously learned. The first extraction method, Yue Hua began to lecture. From time to time, she would demonstrate for the cultivators present. As a sage-level desolate heaven master, Yue Hua's level of the desolate heaven technique was impeccable. All the cultivators present gained a lot from listening to her lecture. Many of the things that they were previously confused about slowly became clearer to them. During Yue Hua's lecture, Luo Hui'er would listen with ease, while stealthily taking glances at Yi Yun. She wanted to see what the scene of a simpleton listening to a book from heaven would be like. Luo Hui'er originally thought that it would be impossible for Yi Yun to understand Yue Hua's lecture. She thought he would either be frowning, with a constipated look, or he would be daydreaming. Either one of those would have made Luo Hui'er delighted. However, when she looked at him, he was listening with a fascinated look on his face. He held a pen in his hand and would scribble on a piece of paper from time to time. A warrior's memory was excellent and they would often have eidetic memory, but that would usually only happen if they had a basic understanding of what they learned. If they did not understand anything, then it would be difficult for them to remember. This was when pen and paper would reflect their functions. Seeing Yi Yun ruminating over it, with the occasional scribble or the occasional frown, Luo Hui'er was stunned. Could this rascal stop taking this so seriously? I'm sure he can neither understand it nor be able to learn the desolate heaven technique. This view was not because Luo Hora looked down on Yi Yun, it was because he had started too late. Besides, he was learning under a grandmaster like Yue Hua, which would be almost impossible to catch up with. If he could not learn it, why was he so adamant about it? Was he stupid? Why bother being so stubborn? During Yue Hua's lecture, there were some parts that became extremely profound. Even some of the Desolate Heaven Master apprentices slowly failed to follow her teachings. Once they were unable to catch up, they would easily be left behind. The cultivators present were all in their teens. Although they were hard-working, they would have some childlike mentalities. They might find it difficult to focus, especially when many of the things were incomprehensible. It was taxing on the brain to try and understand the things Yue Hua was teaching. A couple of minutes would be fine, but to continue on for more than an hour made many of them unable to handle it. Luo Hor realized that some people had already lost focus, and when they regained their focus, they would find many things incomprehensible no matter how hard they paid attention. But Yi Yun, who was a person who did not know anything about the Desolate Heaven technique, was focused from beginning to end. He was quickly scribbling on his paper without any slack. This toad, Luo Hor, could not understand the situation. Even if he knew the hopes were low, he was still diligent. Such a person could easily move a person's heart. Initially, Luo Hoyer's attitude towards Yi Yun was one of ridicule and gloating, hoping to see Yi Yun suffer a setback. But over time, Yi Yun's seriousness changed Luo Hoyer's impression of him. No matter when it was not right to ridicule a hard-working person. It might be easy to laugh at the stupidity of a person determined to surmount an impossible task, but if one were to do so, it meant that one was going further away from success. Yue Hua's lecture went on for 2 hours before she finished. Many of the cultivators received a headache from listening. Only the best, like Luo Hor or Yang Yefeng, could follow Yue Hua's thoughts, receiving enormous benefits. Alright, digest what I have just taught. In 10 minutes, we will have the test. When Yue Hua said this, many of them began to tense up. Many of the youths, who were originally very confident about the test, had now lost their confidence. The things Yue Hua taught were too profound. They were afraid that they would not be able to obtain a good result. Seeing so many people with sour looks, Yang Yefeng was extremely excited. He loved tests. He wanted to earn a scholarship through the test, and at the same time, shine. He wanted to let everyone see his talent in the Desolate Heaven technique. Although he was inferior to Luo Hoyer, if he could become the person closest to Luo Hoyer through his hard work, he might be able to gain the attention of Luo Hoyer. The more Yang Yefeng thought, the greater expectations he had. As for Yi Yun, he had long forgotten about him. Yang Yefeng repeatedly looked at Luo Hoyer, brimming with confidence. He wanted to vie for second place. Alright, I'll hand out the test now. Yue Hua tapped the lecture stand lightly and, with a tiny voice, quietened down the entire classroom. Many of them now held their breaths as they grew nervous. Yue Hua took out rolls of scrolls from her interspatial ring. There were more than 100 rolls. With a flick of her finger, the scrolls flew to the front of every cultivator. These scrolls were made of desolate beast hide and were completely blank. Following that, Yue Hua did a hand seal. With a dense amount of shadows appearing around her fingers, more than 100 seals were sent out by her. They turned into golden runes and flew. The underground hall was not very bright, but with the hundreds of runes appearing, the room brightened up immediately. Oh! Is this the 1,000-hand moon Buddha? Seeing Yue Hua's hand movements, many cultivators' eyes lit up. It was impressive to create more than 100 seals in an instant. People exclaimed. Hearing them making a fuss, Yang Yefeng disdainfully said, "How could this be the 1,000-hand moon Buddha? It's just some hand seals teacher Yue Hua casually made. The 1,000-hand moon Buddha is even more incredible than this." Yang Yefeng said this with a reverence for Yue Hua. Throughout the lesson, Yang Yefeng's ambition grew. He too wanted to learn the 1,000-hand moon Buddha. More incredible than this. People gulped a mouthful of saliva and stayed silent. Grandmaster Yuehua's desolate heaven technique had long since exceeded their imaginations. The 100 seals Yuehua formed flew in front of every cultivator, landing on the blank scroll, merging into them. Yi had also received such a scroll, and the runes on the scroll looked as if they were written with a golden pen. Now, you can choose any grade of desolate bone, extract the energy within the bone and condense it into the rune. I will give all of you 15 minutes before I collect the test papers. The contents of the test mentioned by Yuehua was clear and simple. Although it sounded simple, it was not easy to do so. The runes may look small, but they came from Yuehua. Not only did the rune paths have a large capacity, they were also complex. Trying to conform to the rune paths and then use the power of desolates to slowly fill it was easier said than done. Many of them frowned. They felt like they had an impossible task facing them. The first lesson's test content was very difficult. A few people could not help but glance at Yi Yun. In their hearts, they were thinking that thanks to this rascal, who would end up at the bottom, no matter how bad they did, they would still be able to extract at least some energy. But Yi Yun would most likely stand there sillily like a wooden pole. Teacher Yuehua is such a nice person. She even handed to Yi Yun a test scroll even though he does not know anything. Many of them felt that there was no point in giving Yi Yun a test scroll. They felt that it was only because Yuehua was considerate of Yi Yun's pride that she did not make any distinction. At this moment, the best of them, like Luo Hoyer and Yang Yefeng, had already chosen their desolate bones. They had also begun extracting energy from them, transplanting it into the golden runes. This test's level was not a problem for them, especially for Luo Hoyer. She made a few tiny movements with her finger, as if she was playing a piano. All her movements were harmonious like flowing water. People could clearly see the shimmering light beneath Luo Hoyer's hands. This was the light coming from the condensing of the power of desolates. The methods and phenomena coming from the extraction of energy varied from person to person as everyone had a different affinity with energy. It did not really matter if the power of desolates emitted light, as it could happen with either outcome. But overall, it was better to emit light during condensation. At this moment, Yi Yun had yet to make his move. He could not resist opening his purple crystal's energy vision. In his energy vision, the power of desolate's light was even stronger. Yi Yun could clearly see the light dots following every movement of Luo Hoyer's as they flew into the golden rune. Previously, when Yuehua was lecturing, Yi Yun listened attentively. The first volume of Su Jie's notebook Lin Xintong left him was also on energy extraction. Back then, Yi Yun did not understand a lot of things, but after listening to Yuehua's lecture, and seeing Yuehua's demonstration of the methods, he compared it with the descriptions within Su Jie's notebook. As such, Yi Yun began to understand many things he previously did not. With Yuehua's demonstration, Yi Yun could use his energy vision to see every seal she made clearly. He could see how the energy changed and moved, allowing him to keenly grasp it. The other desolate heaven master apprentices, even Luo Hoyer, would not be able to see it so clearly. With theory conjoining with practice, Yi Yun had a general idea about the extraction of the power of desolates. With the purple crystal's help, extracting the energy from desolate bones was no longer difficult for Yi Yun. By recalling the 10 theories of power of desolates extraction, Yi Yun made his move. He chose a high-grade general-ranked desolate beast's bone. This grade of desolate bone was not easy for a desolate heaven master apprentice. Actually, if Yi Yun wanted to, he could even extract the energy from a primordial species bone. But this would have been too shocking. With some light finger movements, the energy within the desolate bones were now rapidly being pulled out by Yi Yun. In the purple crystal's energy vision, Yi Yun could see the light dots flying around like fairies all over the classroom. But no one could see the light dots condensed by the purple crystal. No matter how grand the scene was, the people around him were blind to this. Chapter 269, Reconciliation. Extracting energy was extremely simple for Yi Yun.
However, injecting the energy into the golden rune required some desolate heaven technique knowledge. He had to understand the reasoning behind the golden rune. But, with the help of the purple crystal, this was not much a problem for Iyun either. Back when Iyun cultivated the Taya sacred technique, the process of drawing the picture of the sun using pure yang qi was 100 times more complicated than infusing energy into this golden rune. Even so, Iyun had managed to complete it. It was easy for Iyun to just copy the process mechanically. But Iyun was not satisfied with just that. While he was drawing according to the golden rune, he made sure to understand why the rune was drawn in the manner it was. He had to understand the reasoning behind the golden rune, or he would never become a desolate heaven master. Iyun was very quick. The purple crystal's pull on the desolate bone's energy was silent, neither did it emit any light. One couldn't even feel any energy fluctuations. This was the power of the purple crystal. Up to this day, everything the purple crystal had done went unnoticed by anyone else. The purple crystal was also completely ignored the 2 times Jiangu examined Iyun's body. Around Iyun, many of the others were looking bitter or very focused. Everyone was engrossed in this intense test. As for Grandmaster Yuehua, she placed all of her attention on Luo Huier. Seeing Luo Huier's methods, the undisguised appreciation in Yuehua's eyes indicated that she treated all the desolate heaven master apprentices as her students, but Luo Huier, she was her disciple. Luo Huier was very fast at extracting the desolate bone energy, but Iyun was faster. If Iyun wanted, he could even complete everything in about 20 seconds. However, to understand the theories within the golden rune, Iyun deliberately slowed down his pace. But even so, Iyun only used about 7 minutes to extract the energy from the desolate bone he chose. There was still plenty of time left, and with Iyun's understanding of the golden rune deepening, he could already absorb another 2 desolate bones' power of desolates to fill up the golden rune. If Iyun completely abandoned the attempt to understand the desolate heaven technique theories, he could even fill the golden rune up with energy. But, after thinking about it, Iyun decided against it. It would be too shocking. After a second thought, Iyun chose another desolate bone, which was lower in quality, and extracted its energy, injecting it into the golden rune. In total, Iyun spent 10 minutes doing these things, so there was still 5 minutes left to the end of the test. Besides Iyun, everyone else were basically fighting for each and every second before the test ended, including Luo Huier. After all, the golden rune left by Yuehua had an enormous storage capacity. One could not fill it even if one had hour to do so, what more in only 15 minutes. Luo Huier released a long, deep breath and massaged her sore wrists. She was very pleased with her test manuscript. Raising her head, she saw Yuehua's look of approval. Yuehua nodded at Luo Huier gently. Luo Huier smiled sweetly back as she had a favorable impression of this teacher. She was not only amiable and kind, she was also pretty. Not bad, carry on practicing your methods. In time, you should be able to develop an extraction mystic technique that belongs to you alone. Yuehua's rare praise was an extremely high appreciation. When the surrounding cultivators heard this, they became extremely envious. As they were still working hard on following the golden rune's paths, Luo Huier was already on the brink of developing an extraction mystic technique of her own. It was really exasperating comparing. Yuehua's appraisal made Luo Huier very happy. As she was rolling up her test scroll, she suddenly recalled something and glanced at Iyun secretly. She saw that Iyun already stood properly, the scroll in front of him had already been rolled up. This rascal, it must have been hard on him. I do not know why he is so obsessed with the desolate heaven technique, but seeing his diligence, I hope he learns something. Luo Huier stopped caring about Iyun. Whether it was the desolate bone's energy extraction methods or the golden runes on the test scroll, it was all too difficult for Iyun in her eyes. Hand in your scrolls. Yuehua said simply, and with that, all the cultivators rolled up their scrolls and handed them over to Yuehua. Tomorrow the results will be released in the Divine City's Desolate Heaven Master Society.
Class dismissed. Saying that, Yuehua immediately left. Many of the cultivators left behind were still edgy. They did not know how good or bad their result would be. I didn't do well. Someone complained. Yes, it's quite difficult. Another person shook his head. I must say, Brother Yifeng must have gotten excellent results. As a leader of the Chu royal residence's younger generation, Yang Yifeng had a large circle of acquaintances in the Tai Divine City. Many were happy to associate themselves with him. At this moment, seeing Yang Yifeng looking proud of his success, everyone had various thoughts and complimented him. Ha ha! All of you do not have to squeeze me. This test was not easy and my answers can only be considered acceptable. It's also good to be acceptable. Brother Yifeng must still give a treat. Yes, Brother Yifeng is probably going to shock everyone, making all of us envious. Many of them joked. It was common for the young master's circle to gather together, complimenting each other. Everyone must be joking, but since we are all gathered here, let's go to the Divine Moon restaurant to enjoy ourselves. If Yang Yifeng treated, it had to be at the Divine Moon restaurant. This had to do with a young master's reputation. There were even different standards of spending in the Divine Moon restaurant. A typical treat by Yang Yifeng would cost several hundred dragon scale runes. Brother Yifeng is an old sport. No returning until we are all drunk. Their group laughed as they gathered their friends, heading towards the Divine Moon restaurant. Seeing this group disappear, Yi Yun leisurely packed his things and left the classroom. He still had plenty of things to do. The 10,000 beast totem and the truth of the laws both needed to be cultivated. Yi Yun's was tight on time. Besides, in a while, Yi Yun was going to go out to hunt desolate beasts to condense his aspect totem. This was the most dangerous place for cultivation in the Tai Divine City. Many elites had died on this path of cultivation. Hey! Just as Yi Yun began walking, he heard someone call him. Turning his head, a girl in red was standing in front of him. It was none other than Luo Huier. Miss Luo, Yi Yun coughed dryly. Whenever he saw Luo Huier, he could not help but recall that scene. In the future, if you want to use the training ground, tell me in advance. I do not like to share the training ground with others. Luo Huier pursed her lips as she said. She wanted to cultivate the Sacred Fire Infinite book, and it was not something others should see. Yi Yun touched his nose. Although it sounded like a boundary was drawn, this also meant that Luo Huier had accepted him as a neighbor. At least, whatever that happened was now in the past and Yi Yun did not need to worry about a crazy girl rushing at him with a sword while staying in the central divine tower. All right. I will probably not use the training ground that often. Chapter 270, Yi Yun's Test Transcript. When Yi Yun left the Central Divine Tower's classroom, he did not immediately return to his apartment but decided to first head to the 10,000 pagoda. Practicing the Desolate Heaven technique required a large amount of Desolate Beast materials to support it. Only then could one have ample practice. Large numbers of cultivators of the Tai Divine City went out into the Divine Wilderness daily to hunt desolate beasts. Some aimed to condense or strengthen their aspect totems, while others simply wanted to hone their combat skills. The desolate bones and other materials from the dead desolate beasts would then be left in the 10,000 pagoda for sale. It wasn't only Desolate Heaven Master apprentices from the Tai Divine City who would buy these items, even other factions of the Tai Divine Kingdom would sometimes make a one-time mass purchase. 5-element crocodile's bones, for symbol snake's teeth, metal-back eagle's claws, heavy armor giant rhinoceros horn. Yi Yun created a purchase list according to his understanding of the Desolate Heaven technique. The cost of these materials ranged from tens of dragon scale runes to above 100 dragon scale runes. By buying everything in bulk, Yi Yun quickly spent 20,000 dragon scale runes. These materials were enough to fill 2 of Yi Yun's interspatial rings to the brim. Practicing the Desolate Heaven technique is truly to spend money like water. Thanks to my previous windfall, I can squander it like this.
any typical cultivator would need to consider before spending anything.
It's almost impossible to learn the Desolate Heaven technique in the Tai Divine City. They can only use their family clan's resources while still in their families, learning it from a young age before coming to the Tai Divine City, using the Desolate Heaven technique as a way to be self-sufficient. Many Desolate Heaven master apprentices would buy materials and practice with them. At the same time, they would use these materials to produce desolate bone relics they could use to exchange for some income. Only then could they barely make ends meet. Not only do I want to practice the Desolate Heaven technique, I also need to find time to go to the Wilderness Divine Hall to practice the 10,000 Beast Totem.
Although I am not lacking in dragon scale runes, I'm lacking in time.
With this thought in mind, he headed towards his apartment in the Central Divine Tower. At this moment, at the 98th floor of the Central Divine Tower, Yue Hua had just returned to her room. This was a large 300 square meter room. The furnishings in the room were simple, quaint, and extremely elegant. The 98th floor of the Central Divine Tower had 4 rooms.
Each room came equipped with a cultivation room, an alchemy lab, and a relic room.
The area totaled up to above 1,000 square meters. The 98th floor of the Central Divine Tower had very dense yuan qi, dense enough for even 4 sages to cultivate.
It was quite nice.
More sages and the concentration of the yuan qi would become insufficient. So no matter how big the rooms were, it was not a waste. Yue Hua walked into her hall and took off her long robe. She then took out the students' test transcripts from her interspatial ring and placed them on a table.
She picked up a single transcript from the pile. It was Luo Hoyer's scroll.
There were also 2 other girls present that looked to be around 20. They casually walked over and picked up the rest of the transcripts.
A girl laughed and said, "Master, since you are eyeing Luo Hoyer, why don't you just take her in as a disciple? Why do you want to use this method of teaching a public class? There will be all sorts of nondescript characters entering your class." These 2 girls were Yue Hua's disciples. They may look 20 years old, but they were several hundred years old. Yue Hua shook her head. Luo Hoyer's background is mysterious. The cultivation technique she cultivates and the methods of her Desolate Heaven technique is quite different from the Tai Divine Kingdom's orthodox heritage. There are even several aspects in which Luo Hoyer's methods exceed the Tai Divine Kingdom's.
A few days ago, many large factions of the Tai Divine Kingdom came with all sorts of favorable terms in an attempt to pull her in, or even just befriend her, but she maintained a distance from them.
She even did that to the Tai Divine Kingdom's royal family.
Who knows, the faction she comes from might be even higher than the Tai Divine Kingdom's. If that is the case, she most likely has a master.
Yue Hua had given it much thought.
If Luo Hoyer had deep affections for her master, she would most likely reject her offer to be a disciple, which would make things awkward.
But Luo Hoyer's talent made Yue Hua want to teach her. She had a feeling that Luo Hoyer's future achievements would exceed her own.
By building a master-disciple relationship with Luo Hoyer, especially with her powerful background, it would be very beneficial, not only for Yue Hua but also for the Tai Divine Kingdom's royal family. I will look at Luo Hoyer's test transcript.
I leave the rest for you,
Yue Hua casually said. Actually, due to her strong mental powers, it would be easy for her to grade 100 transcripts quickly. But she would not do so because these people were not her disciples.
Yes. The 2 girls took the transcripts and left. They had previously taken a similar test and knew Yue Hua's marking criteria.
Yue Hua tested 2 main points when assessing the Desolate Heaven Master Apprentice's energy extraction. One was the quantity of energy extracted, the other was the energy control precision. The more energy that could be extracted, the stronger the refined Desolate Bone Relic. And the better one's control was, the higher the success rate of refining a Desolate Bone Relic would be. There were a total of 182 fine rune paths in the Golden Rune in of a test scroll. These 182 fine rune paths tested the Desolate Heaven Master Apprentice's energy extraction and control. Only a perfect extraction of every strand of power of Desolates, with a perfect control, would allow one be able to perfectly follow the 182 fine rune paths. And besides the Golden Rune's 182 fine rune paths, there were also 3 other energy reservoirs. These 3 energy reservoirs tested the amount of power of Desolates a Desolate Heaven Master Apprentice could extract. The more energy the reservoir had, the harder it would be to fill it. At the Purple Blood Realm and Yuan Foundation Realm, filling up the 3 energy reservoirs was almost impossible. As for the way the scores were calculated, they were done according to this metric. For the Energy Control's 182 fine rune paths, perfectly filling a line earned 2 points, and imperfect filling earned 1 point. There was a total of 364 points. As for the 3 energy reservoirs, filling up one was worth 110 points, for a total of 330 points. The total score was 694, but for a round figure, it was taken to be over 700. According to past experiences, a typical Desolate Heaven Master Apprentice would have an energy control of 140 to 150 points, and their energy reservoir would be about 80 to 90 points. A total of 230 to 240 points was an acceptable score. Exceeding 300 was very good. At 350 points, one was a genius. Above 400 points, that was very rare. Even Yuehua's 2 disciples only managed to score 430 to 440 points when they took Yuehua's test in their teens. This result would satisfy Yuehua. Now, Yuehua was looking forward to Luo Hui's test transcript. She wanted to see how many points a promising Desolate Heaven technique genius that she appreciated would obtain. As she slowly unfolded the scroll, a rough glance from the sides made Yuehua smile. Luo Hui's results would likely give her a surprise. By first looking at the 3 energy reservoirs, she could tell the results with a glance. When she sank her mental power into the 3 energy reservoirs, Yuehua could see that Luo Hui had filled them up with about 60% of energy. This was quite a shocking number. Energy filling, 198 points. Following that was the 182 fine rune paths, which reflected one's energy control. It was more important than the energy filling. As the level of a Desolate Heaven Master increased, their ability to extract energy would increase steadily. But energy control was to a great extent a measure of talent. The same level of Desolate Heaven Masters had different levels of energy control. Seeing Luo Hui's scroll, Yuehua's eyes lit up. This feeling was like reading an ancient Desolate Heaven Master's compendium. It made her want to explore the unknown and look forward to the surprise. Perfect, perfect, perfect. With Yuehua's mental strength, she could quickly analyze the 182 fine rune path situation in a few seconds. But now, she was looking at each fine rune path Luo Hui made, seeing if there were any defects. Perfect, perfect, and another perfect. Yuehua's eyes lit up more and more. She had checked more than 100 fine rune paths by now, and Luo Hui's methods were all perfect. Oh! This rune has a defect. After checking 126 fine rune paths, a defect appeared. There was one fine rune path which Luo Hui did not fill. This made Yuehua sigh. Although she knew that Luo Hui's ability to remain perfect up to now was marvelous, Yuehua, who was yearning for perfection, still felt a sense of regret when she found a defect. This rune path can only earn 1 point. Yuehua shook her head. She sighed to herself that she was being too greedy. A teenage girl who could achieve this was already a monster. What else was she looking for? The 127th fine rune path was also perfect. Following that, perfect and defective runes were interspersed. The further back it went, the examinees would slowly find their mental strength weakened. Even Luo Hui was not an exception. There was no way she could ensure that every single rune path was perfect. Furthermore, they only had 15 minutes for the test. After the 160th fine rune path, many of them were blank, without any energy. This situation resulted in 0 points. Adding them all up, Luo Hoyer's energy control reached a total of 296 points. This was definitely a monstrous score. 296 points, coupled with the other 198 points, Luo Hoyer's total score was on 494 points. She was just 6 points short of 500. Seeing this total score, Yuehua took a deep breath. It was extremely rare to obtain more than 400 points. 450 points was virtually impossible, so the difficulty of obtaining close to 500 was obvious. Luo Hoyer's future prospects cannot be measured. Yuehua was anticipating the future. Such a precious gem one could only come by with luck, not by searching for it. Yuehua kept the test transcript carefully. A short while later, her 2 disciples hastily ran into the room. Pa! The door was flung open. Oh? What's the matter? Yuehua was surprised. Her 2 disciples came from the royal family and from a reclusive family respectively. They were always well-mannered and elegant. Seldom would they appear so flustered.